Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren the Matador of Unmonetization, and welcome to the Belmont Saga. This is, a little backstory before we begin. I got tired of writing about the House of Blanchford back in 2012, 2011, so forth. I'd written 6 books about that. Actually, 7 books about the House of Blanchford. I got kind of tired of writing about the same people, so I created the League of Elders second series. It's the same universe, just a different group of characters. One that we'd already seen, Paymaster Stenstrom, Captain Davidge's paymaster aboard the Seeker, the weird guy wearing the coat and the mask that we saw in the Temple of the Exploding Head series, and I decided I'll proceed forward with this guy and see where the story takes us. So in 2011, 2012, I published the first book. It's called Sands of the Solar Empire. I wrote it as a over 200,000 word book, and my publisher at the time was like, oh, no. No. Way too long. You need to do the old chop sake and cut this in half, because this is too big to publish. I wanted this second series under Lord Stenstrom to be different than the previous ones. I wanted the character to be different, and I wanted the presentation of his story to be different too. So structurally, the beginning of the book was very different than my previous books. The way I wrote it, there wasn't really a good place to break it in two, to cut it down the middle. It just wasn't there. And the only way to do it was to create a cliffhanger. And I hate cliffhangers, hate them with a passion, and here I was forced to create one. So when Sands came out, I spent a couple of nervous years. I'm like, I've left this story in a cliffhanger, and the way the story is presented, the plot was just getting rolling when I cut it off. Because of that, Sands is probably one of the more contentious books that I've written, just because of the presentation of the book and how it ended on a cliffhanger, and I got called out for it by some people. Some people didn't care, but some did. Hard. What kind of hack are you, Mr. Garcia? You unmonetized fool, you. I'm like, well, I'm okay. Okay, maybe I am a hack, but I'm a nice hack, and if you're really that angry, when the second book in the series comes out, which is called Against the Juries, that's the second part of this saga, I'll give it to you for free. And a few people took me up on that, but not too many, thankfully, otherwise I'd be bankrupt. Back in 2012, this book existed as Sands of the Solar Empire, and then about 2 years later, I believe, Against the Juries was published. And Against the Juries is more of a pretty much the same format as my previous books. I got all of the things that I wanted to do differently out of my system, and then that one was more of just a standard book, and people tended to like it a lot better than Sands. Then moving forward to 2019, new publisher, and I was allowed to republish these 2 books, Sands of the Solar Empire and Against the Juries, as one big book. You have the Belmont Saga as a result. Lots of illustrations, lots of maps and things that I love to throw in there. I like it. How it came out. Much better edited than some of my previous stuff, which we're not going to talk about that too much early. No. This story, again, kicks off a brand new group of characters in the same universe, and you'll see a few familiar faces pop up here and there. Very different telling in the Sands of the Solar Empire, and you'll see as we go on what I mean by that. It's told in 3 parts. Sands is. The first part is known as the Admiral's Pleasure. That's the first part of Sands, and that's where the plot really gets going. And then the second part is called All That Resists Him, and where the plot kind of is set aside in favor of other stuff. You'll see when we get to it. The book starts with a series of prologues. I love prologues, although some people hate them. We'll get rolling with this saga with a very short prologue, and then next week is a much longer prologue. Let's begin immediately. The first prologue of the Sands of the Solar Empire, known as The Seeker. And if you've been listening to or reading my previous books, you know that The Seeker is a old stray light ship in The Hazards of the Old Ones. And the first book, that was the steed of Captain Davidge and his Countess Sigillis. They flew around in the Seeker. Captain Davidge loved the Seeker a lot, but it was starting to get old. And he moved on to a much newer, much larger ship known as the New Faith. So here's what happened to the venerable Seeker. Gonna find out right now. Let's proceed. The first prologue of Sands of the Solar Empire, The Seeker. The Admiralty of the Third Fleet had a rare situation on their hands. What to do with the Seeker? Officially designated Main Fleet Vessel 4562, she was a 40-year-old Straylight class warbird, P2 variant, hailing from the old glory days of the League-Zaffin conflict, when fighting the Zaffins was honorable and romantic. The Seeker, once the pride of the fleet, had been in the thick of countless battles and quests, always triumphant. But times change, and the Seeker's best days appear to be behind her. Things were deteriorating quickly. Her current captain, Lord Gona of St. Paris, was suddenly retiring to the rolling hills of Remnath. His hastily penned resignation mentioned something about taking up winemaking at his sprawling estate, and her captain's chair, therefore, was open. Captain Gona wasn't the only prominent officer leaving the Seeker in a hurry. The engineer informed the Third Fleet Admiralty that he too was stepping down at once. He gave them no particular reason. He quickly appointed to another ship and was gone. The same with the boatswain. Even the cook, a Chef Parsley, stepped down, put his boots on the ground, and opened a restaurant in Saga. Finally, the Seeker's crew began filtering away, hooking onto other vessels as fast as they could get them, like rats scurrying away from a burning building. Such a mass exodus from a once great ship never looked good out in the open public. Officers, cooks, and crew normally didn't flee from a prominent warbird like the Seeker, a veteran of Merendra, a veteran of Two-Pitch Nebula. There must be some scandalous reason as to why, and the Admiralty, knowing how the gossip mill could easily begin to turn, scrambled to keep the matter quiet. Very quickly, the Seeker was an abandoned hulk, running lonely in the low polar orbit assigned to her. Lord Milos of Probert, the fleet's chief engineer, was flown aboard the ship to give her a good sounding. Perhaps the reason why everybody wanted to leave would make itself plainly known in short order. Perhaps there was some insidious gas present aboard the ship, addling the crew's wits, or some undetected radiation causing the problem. Certainly Probert would get to the bottom of it. He assessed the status and condition of the Seeker with his usual terse and blunt authority. Significant wear metal fatigue in J's 27 through 45, the neck of the ship. Most, if not all, of the structural components, including custom-crafted parts and linkages, shall need replacing in dry dock. Cause: age of the ship. Stellar Mach coils 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are tacked out and require replacing as standard fleet maintenance procedures demand. As before, additional time in dry dock shall be required to perform the engine refit. Battle shot batteries 2 through 14 starboard side and 10 through 17 port side are badly overdue for replacement, both through wear of use and a lack of suitable ordnance to arm them. As the Seeker does not have a capacity for a thermal plant powerful enough to make use of modern SAR beam weaponry, the batteries will need to be replaced and refitted by hand, with a team of master armorers custom assembling each unit. Assessment: possible, but ruinously expensive. Probert discovered no odd gases or radiations aboard the Seeker, just an old, lonely ship whose grocery list of urgent needs was long and costly. A final note on Lord Probert's report was interesting, though rather out of character for the renowned fleet engineer who normally stuck to cold, stark facts and calculated data. He said the Seeker had a strange feel to it as he prowled the decks, and it wasn't due to gas or radiation. "Ship's haunted," he said in so many words. In interviewing Captain Gona, the engineer, the boatswain, and the cook, the Admiralty got a very similar story. The ship was beset by moaning demons and bad dreams. To serve aboard the ship was unbearable, and all of them agreed they would never set foot aboard her again. So there the admirals were, with a decrepit 40-year-old warbird that needed a large amount of expensive refitting to keep spaceworthy, and apparently required an exorcism as well. Just think of the scandal that would make. Scuttle her, melt the Seeker down, and recast her as something useful. That seemed a clear course of action. However, because the Seeker was a fairly well-known and well-thought-of ship, the Admiralty couldn't simply tow her to the fleet scrapyards at Cana X4 and make her disappear. Though, having fallen into obscurity as of late, she had fought a great deal of battles with the Zaffins over the years and come through unvanquished, with the famed Captain Davidge in command and his fighting Countess Sigillus of Blanchfort sitting at his side. Also, the Sisterhood of Light, a highly influential sect and the fleet was always attempting to please, was very fond of the Seeker due to their past association with it. "How is the Seeker?" the Sisterhood often asked when they visited the fleet. It was quite probably the only ship in the active fleet they knew by name, and it was those casual but frequent inquiries that helped put a shield over the old ship that no other vessel could enjoy. So, what to do with the Seeker? In a virtual no-win situation, the Admiralty decided to raise the captain's chair of the Seeker to an open debate one last time, freeboot style, as sometimes was still done. In doing so, they could have time to grease up the Sisterhood and any others who had a fondness for the ship, to let them know at a measured pace that the famed vessel was getting too old and dangerous to be kept in service. That way, she could slowly fade away, and those who loved her could accept it as what must be. The great days of the Seeker were clearly well behind her. So, using the vague and contentious freeboot system from the old days of the fleet, the Seeker's chair was put up on the blocks. Anybody wanting the chair could simply present themselves and prove their merits. That person had to have a good sponsor, connections, a grand house behind them, and, best of all, the willing coin to repair her. The pickings, however, might prove to be slim. Most of the young hopefuls coming up through the ranks of the fleet and League society wanted the captain's chair of a newer ship, either right off the blocks awaiting a christening, or fairly new, just needing a coat of paint. The Admiralty knew that few would want a once great warbird with only a few years of service left that needed an expensive dry docking and was rumored to be haunted. So, who was it to be? Who would come and save the Seeker with all the aches and pains and ghosts that came with her? And with that, we conclude the first prologue of Sands of the Solar Empire, The Seeker. As we see, the Captain Davidge's old trusty warbird, the Seeker, is having a rough go of it. It's old. It needs a lot of repair. Having been in the military, I know how much maintenance it's required to keep any sort of military vehicle running. It takes a ton of work. Seeing it, watching movies and regarding military aircraft and military vehicles don't scratch the surface of what it takes to keep these vehicles running. It takes a massive effort. Deny these pieces of equipment the standard maintenance they need, and they quickly become derelict. They're not going anywhere. If it's a truck, it's not moving. If it's a plane, it's not flying. And there's a lot of specification as well. This airplane has this part in it, and this part is beyond its service life. So this plane is grounded until that part goes. And that's how it is. Could it fly with that part? It could, but it's out. It's no longer serviceable, and it stays on the ground. That's how the military works. And that's what we see with the Seeker. An old ship that's been through a lot of battles, needs a lot of work, and the fleet, as we're going to see in the next few pages, does things its own way. And it does things that seem kind of weird just to the casual observer. I always wanted the fleet to be that way. It being in the military, there's a lot of weird customs and traditions and practices that outsiders who don't know the situation might find odd. And that's what's going on in the fleet. You have an old ship like the Seeker that needs to be fixed. The fleet isn't going to pay for that. Who is going to pay for it? The captain of the ship is going to pay for it. And that's why you see all these rich blue lords and ladies from across the league usually sitting on the captain's chair, because not only do they have to have skills, command ability, programmability, yada yada yada, they got to have money to keep their own ship running. Captain Davidge had to do it. All of the captains have to do it. They have to put up their own coin, keep their vessel running, especially when it needs a ton of maintenance. So the Seeker sitting there needing a lot of work, and it's going to cost a lot of money to fix it. They need to find a captain who's going to be willing to do that. And so the chair of the Seeker is going to come up, and it's basically a freeboot style, which is kind of the way the old navies used to do it. Very contentious. If you want the chair, all you got to do is present yourself to the Admiralty and argue your case, and it's kind of a stacked deck against you, though. You got to have a good name, a good house, you got to have connections, someone to sponsor you, and you got to have lots of money to pay for what needs to be done. So that's what the Seeker needs. Oh, also, the ship seems to be haunted. Doesn't really go into details as to what's going on, but apparently the captain, the bosun, the engineer, and the cook all agree that there's something scary going on the Seeker, that it's too scary to be aboard. They're never going to go near that because it's just too scary. Ship needs an exorcism, apparently. And so the Admiralty is like, well, what are we going to do with that? We should just melt its ass down. Take the Seeker to Cana X4 or Cana Jaina on Baz, melt it down, reuse the metal. But a lot of people with influence have a fondness for Seeker, especially the Sisterhood of Light. Whenever they come and visit the fleet, they're always asking, how's the Seeker? Can we have a tour of the Seeker? Because the sisters used to have a priory on the Seeker, and they have an apparent fondness for it. And that sort of, those casual asides from an influential sect like the Sisters that the fleet is always struggling to please is going to throw a huge shield over the ship. They can't just make it disappear. They're going to have to as I said, give the people who love the Seeker time to accept that she just can't fly anymore, and her fate will be what it needs to be. Very short entrance to Sands of the Solar Empire, first book in the Belmont Saga. As we see, the Seeker is going to be a major player in this book, as it should be. The second prologue we'll be reading next week, prologue number 2, known as The Appointment, and that's a much longer one. That's a long one. And we're going to see some of those weird customs that I mentioned come up in full force. We're going to see weird things happening, things that might seem funny, but I assure you are of the utmost gravity. Yes. So next week, prologue number 2, The Appointment. And then we kick off the main body of the plot, part 1, known as The Admiral's Pleasure. Until then, this is Ren Presents. I'm your host, Ren. Peace out.